The photograph was still there on the mantel the day I finally forgave him. The edges were burned, the colors faded, but I kept it anyway. My children never understood why I chose to remember what he tried to destroy. I just smiled. Because some secrets don't end in betrayal. They end in love that refused to die. I didn't know that yet, the night I found it in the ashes of our old fireplace. That was the night everything I believed about my marriage began to change. The flames had almost gone out by the time I saw it, a photograph half buried in the ashes, a secret my late husband had tried to burn. Even through the smoke and time, I could see love and betrayal frozen in that image, the beginning of a family story I was never meant to know. I remember kneeling on the hearth, the faint scent of charred oak still hanging in the air. The rain outside whispered against the windows, steady and soft. Our old mantel clock ticked above me, patient as a heartbeat. That sound used to bring me comfort. Tonight, it sounded like time reminding me what it takes from us, one quiet second at a time. He had been gone 3 weeks. Long enough for the sympathy cards to stop arriving, long enough for the neighbors to stop checking in, and long enough for the silence to become something alive, something that filled the corners of the house. I'd spent the afternoon cleaning his shed, sorting through decades of his things. My husband, Thomas, kept that space like a museum of his own making. Every hammer hung in perfect order, every nail jar labeled in his neat handwriting. He'd been a man who loved precision. Maybe that's why I noticed it, the one thing that didn't belong. At the back of his toolbox, wrapped in wax paper and bound with an old rubber band, lay the photograph. Its edges were scorched, the image faintly warped. He tried to destroy it, but something stopped him before he finished. I pulled the wrapping apart carefully, afraid it might crumble in my hands. The photo showed him much younger, his hair dark and full, his smile unguarded. And beside him stood a woman I didn't recognize. She was beautiful in a quiet, timeless way, the kind of beauty that made you believe in summers that never end. Her hand rested lightly on his shoulder, as if she'd always belonged there. I studied that gesture longer than I should have. The rain grew heavier. Drops ran down the window like tears I refused to shed. I set the photo down on the workbench, tracing the burnt edges with my fingertips. Then I noticed something written on the back, faded pencil marks, barely legible. For when I'm ready. My breath caught. Ready for what? To remember her? To confess her? I didn't know which question hurt more. I slipped the photograph into my pocket, locked the shed, and carried it back to the house as though I were holding a living thing. That evening, my daughter Anna stopped by after work. She'd been trying to visit often lately, though her visits felt more like check-ins, short, polite, and cautious. She worried about me, though she'd never say it aloud. "Mom, you need to eat more than toast and tea," she said, setting down a casserole I'd never finish. Her tone carried that soft scolding only daughters can manage. I tried to smile. "I'll try, sweetheart. How's work?" "The same. Busy. Everyone says hi. We've been talking about Dad a lot lately." Her voice faltered slightly, and for a moment, I saw the little girl. She used to be the one who'd crawl onto Thomas's lap after dinner and fall asleep on his chest while he hummed some song he never remembered the words to. "Mom," she said after a pause, Are you really doing okay?" I wanted to say yes, but the truth pressed heavy in my robe pocket, warm against my thigh. "I found something today," I said quietly. She glanced up, concerned. "What do you mean?" I pulled out the photograph, still wrapped in the handkerchief, and placed it on the table. Anna unwrapped it carefully, and I watched her expression shift from curiosity to confusion to something that looked like fear. "Who is she?" she whispered. I shook my head. "I don't know. It was in his shed. Looks like he tried to burn it." Her eyes lingered on her father's younger face, on that easy smile none of us had seen in years. "Mom, maybe it's just a friend. You don't know the story behind it." "Then what was he waiting to be ready for?" I asked. She looked away. "Mom, please, don't do this. He's gone. Let it rest." Her voice trembled slightly, the way mine used to when I tried to convince myself something didn't matter. After she left, I sat at the kitchen table alone. The tea had gone cold. The house was so still that I could hear the faint ticking of the clock from the living room. It was a patient sound, almost kind. I carried the photograph to the fireplace. The ashes were still faintly warm from the morning's fire. I held it up to the light, tracing the charred corners, trying to imagine the moment he'd stood here, holding it in his hands. Did his fingers tremble? Did he whisper her name before he struck the match? I could almost see him, his tall frame bent slightly, his brow furrowed with that same quiet concentration he'd wear when fixing something that wasn't quite broken. There had been moments in our marriage when his silence unsettled me. The way he'd stare out the window some evenings, as though he were remembering another life. I used to think it was a war, or his father's death, or the weight of raising 3 children. But now I wasn't sure. I sat back on my heels and stared into the dying embers. My reflection wavered in the glass screen, tired eyes, soft gray hair pulled into a knot. I was 71, and for the first time in my life, I didn't know the man I'd shared my life with. I whispered into the quiet, "Who were you to him?" The fire gave no answer, only the rain, gentle and relentless, whispering against the roof like an old memory. I wrapped the photograph again, tighter this time, and tucked it inside my robe pocket. I didn't want to destroy it, not yet, because I knew whatever truth it carried, I needed to face it. I stood, took a deep breath, and looked around the living room. The walls were filled with our history family photos, the wedding portrait above the piano, the framed drawing our son made when he was 7. Every image told a story I thought I knew by heart. But now I saw something else. Spaces, silences, questions, and in that silence, I could almost hear his voice, low and steady as it had been all those years ago. Some things are better left alone, Mary. Maybe, but not this. The rain had settled into a steady rhythm, drumming softly against the roof like an old lullaby. I sat back down in my chair, the photograph folded safely in my pocket, the empty teacup cooling beside me. The house was too quiet. Every sound seemed to carry wood creaking, pipes sighing, the faint rustle of wind through the chimney. When Thomas was alive, nights like this were full of life. He'd sit in that same armchair, polishing his glasses while the television murmured in the background. Sometimes he'd hum under his breath, off-key but content. Now that space was nothing but air and memory. I looked toward his chair and almost expected to see him there, his slippers waiting, the newspaper open to the crossword. For a heartbeat I almost spoke to him, but words stuck somewhere between my chest and throat. Instead, I closed my eyes and let the sound of rain carry me backward. We were newly married then, renting a small house near the river. I was 28, he was 33. On summer evenings, we'd sit outside after dinner and watch the light fade across the water. He used to photograph everything: birds, bridges, even my hands when I wasn't looking. One night he'd taken a picture of me laughing, hair blown wild by the wind. When I saw it, I said, "Delete that, I look ridiculous." He smiled. "You look alive." That was Thomas, steady, kind, certain of the world. I'd loved that certainty more than anything. I remembered that moment now and wondered, did he take her photograph, too? The woman in the ashes. Was she the one who taught him how to hold a camera, how to see beauty in small things? The thought made my stomach twist. I rose from the chair and walked to his desk. The drawers were still full of his habits: rubber bands, receipts, paper clips lined in neat rows. I opened the small wooden box where he kept his keepsakes: ticket stubs, old coins, the tiny shell our youngest had given him after a beach trip 20 years ago. Beneath those mementos lay a single envelope, unsealed, yellowed with time. I hesitated, then slid it open. Inside was a blank sheet of paper, brittle at the edges. Maybe he'd meant to write something and never did. Maybe this, too, was for when he was ready. I placed it back carefully, feeling a strange tenderness for the man I thought I knew. When I turned around, my reflection caught in the glass of the window an older woman standing among ghosts. I whispered to that reflection, "If you wanted to be forgiven, Thomas, all you had to do was ask." Outside, the rain softened, but thunder grumbled somewhere far off. I watched the faint pulse of lightning in the distance, thinking of how storms move slowly but leave everything changed. The clock chimed 10. I should have gone to bed, but sleep felt like betrayal, like closing my eyes on a truth that was asking to be seen. So I pulled out the photograph once more and studied it under the lamplight. Her eyes were bright, unafraid. She wore a simple dress, The kind that never goes out of style. There was something familiar about her smile, gentle, genuine, not the practiced smile of a stranger posing for a camera. And then I noticed the background, a willow tree, its branches sweeping low, the same kind that grew near the old park where Thomas and I used to take the children. Maybe coincidence, maybe not. The longer I looked, the less I felt anger. What rose instead was a deep ache, the kind that comes when you realize how much of a person's life you'll never truly know. I thought of Anna's face earlier, the worry in her eyes. She loved her father fiercely, believed in him completely. What would she think if she knew this? Would she hate him for it? Or worse, start doubting the love that built our family? No, I couldn't tell her yet. Not until I understood the story behind this photograph. Not until I knew who the woman was, and why Thomas had kept her hidden all these years. I placed the photo back inside the handkerchief and laid it gently in the top drawer of my nightstand. The air in the room smelled of smoke and lavender from the sachet he'd given me years ago. For a moment, I let the scent carry me into memory again, our anniversary dinner at that little Italian place downtown, candlelight flickering between us. He'd reached across the table and taken my hand. "You know," he'd said, "I never thought I deserved this much peace." I'd laughed then. "Peace? You call raising 3 children peaceful?" He smiled, shaking his head. "Not that kind of peace." I never asked what he meant. I wish I had. The storm outside had begun to fade. Only a few raindrops still traced the glass, sliding slowly down like tears finding their way home. I turned off the lamp, but the glow of the dying embers still warmed the room. As I lay back against the pillows, my eyes drifted toward the mantel where his photograph stood beside our wedding picture. They looked at each other across the years, 2 versions of the same man, one young and unburdened, one older and quiet with secrets. "I'll find her," I murmured into the dark. "Whoever she was, I'll find her." The words felt heavy and right, like a promise I didn't know I'd been waiting to make. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled one last time, low and soft, like the sound of a curtain falling at the end of a play. I didn't know it then, but that was the night the past began to wake. The photograph I found in the ashes wasn't just a secret, it was a doorway. And once it opened, there was no turning back. If you've ever discovered something that made you question everything you thought you knew, tell me in the comments below. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe, because the next chapter, The Woman in the Photograph, continues this story when the morning light reveals the first real clue about who she was. Until then, keep listening for the truths that refuse to stay buried.